Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving time period and got some time with your family. Welcome back to the Capitol today. Today I'm releasing out my third volume of Federal Fumbles, 100 Ways that the Federal Government has dropped the ball. This book is designed to be a reminder that we still have an issue with debt and deficit in America. For some reason, the conversation has slowed on the issue of debt and deficit. It should not. This should be an ongoing part of our conversation. Starting in 2010, when our deficit was $1.4 trillion, it was this epic deficit that caught the nation's attention because it had grown so incredibly large. Since 2011, that deficit has gone down every single year until 2016. Starting in 2016, the deficit started increasing again, and it increased again from 2016 to 2017. We have got to pay attention to debt and deficit. It needs to be a part of our ongoing conversation. So we release out this resource again as a set of ideas to say, if we're going to get control of our spending, if we're going to manage our economy and our spending better, then there are specific ways to do it. There are essential things that we need to be able to spend money on. Transportation, national defense, disaster relief, things that are essential for us to be able to do. For us to be able to afford to do those things, we've got to be able to pay better attention to other things. So we set this out. Let me set a little bit of context for you. There are certain things that we want to be able to put into perspective with this. This is not just a central set of ideas. They're actually illustrations to a larger set of issues. If we're going to have straightforward solutions, it's going to start with fixing some process things, beginning with the budget and appropriations process. The budget process was created in 1974. It's only worked 4 times since 1974. It was created to give us greater transparency. It's actually provided greater complexity, and it's been very difficult, if not impossible, to be able to actually run as designed. We have to be able to fix the budget in the appropriations process. We have to fix the grant process. Over the years, there's been a lot of attention paid to contracting and how we're actually putting checks out for individual contracts. That same attention has not been paid to the grant process. So because of that, it's the easiest way to be able to actually get dollars at the door. More and more agencies are spending more and more on grants. Those grants have little to no oversight. So the grants need additional oversight in the process and need to be able to fix that. We put out something called the taxpayer's right to know, because every year we talk about duplication, and every year we talk again about duplication from the previous year, and it just keeps going on and on and on. 6 years ago, I put out the taxpayer's right to know in the House of Representatives. Still continue to carry that here. It's passed unanimously in the House of Representatives. It's being held up here in the Senate to be able to move. It is a very simple, straightforward piece. You can't tell where there's duplication in government until you go to GAO and do a request for them to study a specific area. 18 months later, they can come back to you and give you the information on that particular slice where there's duplication. That should be something you can do in 18 seconds rather than in 18 months. We should be able to see from every single agency what they do. Right now, the new cabinet officials cannot tell you everything that agency does. There is no master list. You can't deal with duplication if you can't see the duplication. So that's an area that we have to fix structurally. And the final thing is, we need to be able to fix the Senate rules. If we can't debate these hard issues, we can't solve these hard issues. And currently, we can't get to even debating these issues. Some of these things come up every single year, and everyone says, why is it not addressed again? Some of it is a structural problem in the United States Senate where we cannot get to the issues and be able to address those. So my hope is that we can actually get to the point that we can fix the structural problems here in the Senate and actually be able to do the real work. Now, from that, the book itself, as I mentioned before, it's a set of illustrations. It's not designed to be an exhaustive list. I wish there were only 100 ways that the federal government dropped the ball. There are more than 100, but we gave an illustration of 100 of these. And I break them out into large categories. Wasteful spending is probably the easiest one to be able to see. A lack of oversight is a second one. Where there is spending, it just needs additional oversight. A third one is structural changes that are needed. And a fourth one is not wasted money, but wasted effort. Let me give you some examples on all those. And all of these are now on our website at lankford.senate.gov, lankford.senate.gov, and you can get a chance to be able to download this. It is a free resource that is there on the site. So wasteful spending, some of the things that we listed out there. The National Science Foundation did a small study, $40,000. That's incredibly small. That's a rounding error in Washington, D.C. But they did a $40,000 study on the effect that refugees are experiencing in Iceland when they come to Iceland. Now, I understand why the UN may want to do a study on refugees in Iceland and their effects, but I don't understand why the federal taxpayers are, through the National Science Foundation, paying for a study for how refugees are handling Iceland when they move to Iceland. There's about 60 refugees that have moved from Syria and Iraq in that location, and we spent $40,000 studying those. We have one that we identified that, again, I look at it and say it's fine if it actually happens. Why are the taxpayers in Oklahoma paying for it? Doggy Hamlet is the name of a production that the NEA put $30,000 into. It actually uses no lines from Hamlet, which again is fine if they want to do it, but it's an outdoor production where they chase sheep and dogs around a big pen and do a big performance on it. I've seen some of the clips of the performance. Again, it's fine if a local community wants to do that. I'm just confused why the people of Oklahoma are paying for the production of Doggy Hamlet in New Hampshire. There is $1 billion that's being spent on the streetcar in San Diego. It works out to about $100 million a mile for that streetcar. I look at it from the perspective of coming from Oklahoma. Currently, there's a streetcar being installed in Oklahoma City. The people of Oklahoma and of Oklahoma City are paying for the streetcar in Oklahoma City and all the construction work and all the details around it. The only federal expense of that was the initial environmental study required by the federal government. The rest of it's being paid for by the people of that community. I'm a little confused why there's $1 billion being spent for a local transportation project in San Diego to be able to extend that out. There's also areas that I talk about the lack of oversight. I gave you some small examples like the Doggy Hamlet. Some large examples are out there as well. The tax gap has been an issue that GAO has listed year after year after year as a high risk. It's current at $458 billion. That is where the IRS has done their own evaluation through the National Research Program, trying to identify where they've got gaps in where they're collecting taxes, and they've identified about $458 billion, but they're not actually acting on it to be able to collect the taxes that are owed. There's also a do not pay and a do not use system. That's a system set up among multiple agencies to say this is either a contractor or an entity that should not be paid. For instance, they're on the death master file from the Social Security Administration, meaning this person's deceased, so don't pay them a check related to whatever entitlement may have been due to them in life, but not as due to them in death. That's not being fully integrated among all of the different agencies. That should be a common sense thing to do. Let me show you where that shows up. In SNAP, the retailers that provide SNAP benefits and sell SNAP benefits. There's about 3,400 of those retailers that are using a individual that is deceased. That's $2.6 billion just because they're not connecting the dots with someone who's deceased and not connecting it with SNAP retailers. That needs to be addressed. Immigration's been a hot topic, and this is an area where I talk about structural changes. Immigration's an area that everyone would say either build a wall or do minor changes or more enforcement or enforce existing laws. Well, let me give you some of the problems that we have, though. About 66% of the individuals that are in the country right now, not legally, came in under a legal visa and overstayed. After the 9/11 Commission, the federal government was required to do a biometric entry-exit visa system. So we would know every person that came in, when they actually left the country, and if they didn't leave the country. That has not been done still to this day. And that was a major portion of the 9/11 Commission. All the conversation about hiring 5,000 additional ICE or Border Patrol individuals. Currently, it takes over 450 days in ICE or the Border Patrol to hire one person. 450 days of hiring. If you want to add additional immigration judges, it takes 742 days to hire one immigration judge. These issues sound simplistic to be able to solve, but there are real structural problems, both with hiring and how things actually operate in these different agencies. These need to be addressed. When I deal with things like not wasted dollars, but wasted time and wasted effort, some of those are things like the nomination process in the Senate, which I address. There are real ways to be able to address the time and the length of time it takes to do nominations. In 2013, the Senate said it had this exact same problem. It put out a solution, 2 hours for district court judges, 8 hours for everyone else except for circuit court, Supreme Court, and for cabinet officers. Those were 30. The Senate functioned under that standing rule for 1 year and then walked away from it. I'd like to be able to bring that back up again and have that be the rule. If the Senate is ever going to get back to being a body that's actually operating and taking up legislation as well as nominations, we have to have an expedited process for this. Claire McCaskill and I are working on something called FACE. It's already passed through the Senate now. It's dealing with customer service. Right now, agencies can't do what every business in America does. Have an online survey for how did we treat you in customer service. Just send out some basic questions to be able to send back. The reason for that? The Paperwork Reduction Act, actually. These agencies can't do it because they have to follow through the process of the Paperwork Reduction Act. It takes so many months to be able to get through the process of doing it, they just don't do it at all. We're trying to be able to fix that. If agencies are ever going to get better at customer service and taking care of people, they have to be able to get feedback. It's not wasted dollars. It's a lot of wasted effort, though. It's a way that we're fumbling the ball and being able to just take care of people in this. There's a lot that needs to happen. We're trying to give some specific examples. Again, it's not intended to be the big one. But if we're going to deal with deficit, we have to be able to address it. We have to think about it. We have to talk about it. And we have to find ways to be able to solve it. There are things we need to spend money on. But there are also some things we don't need to spend money on. And there's some things that we need to stop doing or start doing if this is ever going to turn around. Let me open this up for questions. Yes, ma'am.
You've raised concerns about the debt also in the tax debate.
I have.
What's going to be critical to getting your vote at this point on the bill? Can you outline that a little bit?
What I've said all along on dealing with the tax bill is we can't ignore the debt and deficit issues. As conservatives, we've said for a long time, if we're going to ever get ahead of the deficit, we have to control our spending and we have to have a growing, healthy economy. Well, if we use all of the tax reductions to just offset, we're never getting on top of the debt and deficit. So my first question is, how are we dealing with debt and deficit in the tax? Are the estimates real? Are all the offsets real? And I'm trying to be able to work that through with the committee to try to address that. To me, the big issue is, how are we dealing with debt and deficit? Do we have realistic numbers? And is there a backstop in the process, just in case we don't?
What are you hearing from them? I mean, are they meeting with you today or tomorrow?
Yeah, we've had phone calls throughout the Thanksgiving time period. Our staff have had constant interaction. We'll continue to be able to have that. This is not a finished product. This is a product that's still coming together on it. There are lots of questions, obviously, with the parliamentarian this week to be able to work on what language works with the bird requirements. We'll continue to work on that. Yes, ma'am.
I guess sort of related to that, are you concerned about the fact that some of the provisions as the bill currently stands are set to expire and maybe could be extended in the future, and that would increase the debt?
Yeah, I'm always concerned about that, but not as much, because a future Congress is going to have to deal with the exact same rules this Congress has to deal with. That is to look at how our spending is done, how you're going to offset that. They've got to be able to take that vote. Yes, ma'am.
Could you talk a little bit about the assumptions that the tax plan is going to yield 0.4 percentage points of extra growth and they'll pay for themselves? Do you buy that argument?
Yeah, I'm actually, there's a lot of economists that are out there. There's an article today in the Wall Street Journal even talking about that same group with a lot of different economists walking through that. The 0.4, or actually it's just 0.4 growth estimate is not a bad estimate. That's a fair estimate. My issue is that everything that's there, what if we don't get 0.4% growth? Is there any backstop? Is there an emergency that's going to come behind us and say, what if that does not occur, and how we're going to protect ourselves in the economy in the days ahead? From Oklahoma and Kansas and those of us in the middle of the country, we have seen some of this in our own state legislatures. I think it's important that we learn some of those lessons, what we've seen in states, and to be able to put into place at the beginning a backstop procedure to make sure that we're guarding against this. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a similar red line like Senator Corker when he says, I'm not going to vote for something that adds a penny to the deficit? And also, would you be at least willing to vote to proceed to the bill when we get that vote as early as far after?
Yeah, I think we need to get to a solution on the bill. I think there's broad need for tax reform. I'm not opposed to doing tax reform. We just need to make sure that when we do it right, because we won't hit this again for another 30 years or so. And so when it's done, we need to build in basic protections, the just-in-case options, and we need to also make realistic presentations with it. Yes, sir.
With a question regarding the report. I have a report that says that there are 13 IG Inspector General vacancies, and 12 of them require Senate confirmation. An argument out there that administrations have no real incentive to hire these because these are cops are going to wrap their knuckles. Is there any conversation or discussions or ideas that are being kicked around about how you can change that dynamic? I mean, the report, what you put out here, suggests that the IG's work is important.
Yeah, the IG's work is not only important, so is GAO. There are 15,000 IG reports right now out and recommendations that are out that have not been implemented across all of the federal government. That's exceptionally important that we get those recommendations actually implemented. This was the same issue we had with the last administration, where they took 5-6 years to even recommend someone to be an inspector general in one of these agencies. It is very important that we actually get those individuals in there. They should work in a cooperative way with the leadership of all the agencies, but they're also exceptionally important to actually be there and to be a part of that conversation. So I'm very supportive of SIGI and what they're doing with the Inspector General and their council. They've done some pretty remarkable work. For instance, if you've not seen the website that they put together, they have one central website for all the inspectors general now of all the reports out from every single agency, what is done, what is not done. So for the first time, about 2 months ago, anyone can go online and to be able to see all of the reports from all the inspectors general and what's out there. Is that just oversight? What is that one?
Sounds about right.
We'll pull that for you to make sure that you've got the right website for it. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned fixing the Senate rules, kind of piggybacking on
Yeah.
that. What else can Congress do to improve the communication that you guys have among each other to say, hey, why are we sending out this money here?
Yeah, some of the most basic thing is oversight in every agency. One of the things that I talk about not only with the Senate rules so we can actually debate some of these issues is also the length of time that it takes to do it. So for instance, in the budget process, I think we should do appropriations every 2 years rather than every year. That gives us more time with the committees to not have to worry about putting things together for this year, but you're putting it together for this year, you're doing oversight the other years. Right now, there's the constant struggle to be able to get through all the issues that need to be addressed. But there are some structural things like that that I think can be done. Yes, sir.
2 areas. First of all, what do you mean by just-in-case options? And then secondly, how concerned are you, on the one hand you have this tax bill coming down the pipe, but then you also have a potential omnibus that's going to add
Right.
$100 billion to the deficit
Correct.
per year, and then this big flood supplemental.
So you have a flood of different issues that are coming in December, quite frankly. There's quite a few that the next 3.5 weeks will have to be done. The backstop piece for me is the just in case. What if the growth estimates don't hit the 0.4%? What happens? What should happen in the tax code to be able to make adjustments? Every economist is guessing. It is their best guess. It is a well-educated guess, but every economist is guessing. I believe that we should not only take the best guesses that we can get out there from the best economists and be able to look at it, but we should build in the what if. What if this doesn't work? What changes might be needed in the tax code in the days ahead to be able to adjust in what scenario? So if the revenue is not coming in, should the rates change? All of those are in conversation. Yes, ma'am.
So this is your third year releasing this report. Have you seen any changes made to some of the issues that you've highlighted?
We actually have. In the back of the book, you'll see, and you have the opportunity to go through what we call touchdowns or first downs. We also call them recoveries, how you're going to be able to get out of this, and we try to highlight a few of those. Our focus is that this is the to-do list for this next year, and as we work through this to-do list, our staff is assigned to say, where can we find places to be able to address this? In appropriations language, with the authorizing committees, working with the administration, where can we help find this? And we help try to identify some that we've already seen in the past year in this, as well as some of the things that are ongoing in current appropriations language this year to try to address it. Yes, ma'am.
So if there were no changes made to the bill, the Senate tax bill, would you be able to vote for it as it currently stands? And also, can we talk a little bit more about what the conversations like that you're having with Finance Committee and the leadership?
Yeah, good conversations on it, and I won't even go to if there are no changes, because there are changes. There are already changes going through as there's been a lot of conversations with multiple members. So there's no such thing right now as there are no changes because it's already in flux. The conversations have all been extremely productive. No one is pushing back. No one is saying, no, we don't want to do this. It's just, how do we get it done? How do we work through the parliamentary process? And what's the best way to be able to do that? So those are all very, very fair questions. Yes, sir.